Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com.
Today, we go to Abbottabad, Pakistan, in the post-September 11 campaign against al-Qaeda for the story of Operation Neptune Spear. A longer version of this feature with fact sheets and photos is available in the print edition on LinkedIn or by email.
Just before midnight in Abbottabad, the lights inside a walled compound glowed like any other late-night household. Family members drifted towards sleep, a television flickered, and the streets outside settled into the quiet of a Pakistani garrison town. Over the horizon, two stealth-modified Black Hawk helicopters slipped in low, rotors beating the air in a controlled thrum as pilots held to the ridgelines for as long as they could.
On board, American special operators checked weapons, night vision goggles, and breaching gear for a mission described in planning rooms as once in a generation. They had rehearsed their movements again and again on a full-scale mock-up, but the real compound waited in darkness, with unknown people behind every wall, and a national border already crossed without permission.
The mission had been narrowed to a few essentials. Get in quickly, identify the people inside, move through the building with control, and leave before the wider situation in Pakistan could overtake the assault. The operators knew they were not simply executing a raid on a house. They were carrying the result of years of intelligence work, political risk, and military planning into a few minutes of action.
As the lead helicopter eased toward a hover inside the courtyard, the plan met the real world. Rotor wash swirled inside the tight walls, lift disappeared, and the aircraft slammed down instead of hanging in the air as rehearsed. In seconds, a carefully timed insertion became dust, metal, and shouted commands. The operators kicked free, secured the wreck, and shifted from planned air assault to improvised entry.
The second helicopter put its team down outside the compound as planned. That element moved to the perimeter wall, opened a breach, and entered from a different angle. A separate group turned towards the smaller guest house where a key courier and his family were believed to live. Dogs barked, neighbors stirred, lights came on, and the first explosions and shots carried through the night. This mattered because the crash could have frozen the whole raid at the worst possible moment. Instead, the separate teams still created pressure from more than one direction, forcing the compound to be solved as a problem rather than simply reacted to as an accident. The plan had fractured, but the purpose of the plan remained intact.
Every step toward the main building carried one hard question. Was the man inside really Osama bin Laden? Or was this another near miss at the end of a long trail? The operators could not answer that from the courtyard. They could only keep moving, knowing that Pakistani security forces might soon be reacting to noise, radar returns, or the sudden confusion inside a quiet neighborhood.
To understand the weight of that night, you have to pull back almost a decade. The September 11 attacks had killed thousands in New York, Washington, and over Pennsylvania, launching a global hunt for the people who planned and protected the operation. Bin Laden became more than a target. He became a symbol of unresolved trauma, unfinished business, and the limits of power against networks, couriers, and safe havens. Years passed while American forces toppled regimes, scattered training camps, and chased fighters through mountains and across borders. Still, bin Laden remained beyond confirmed reach. By the time analysts focused on Abbottabad, the war in Afghanistan had lasted far longer than many expected in the first autumn after the attacks. If the compound truly held bin Laden, it offered a chance to close one important chapter of that larger conflict.
The location made the decision especially dangerous. Abbottabad was not a cave complex or remote tribal hideout. It was a city inside Pakistan, near a military academy, in a country that was officially a partner and also deeply wary of American actions. A failed raid would mean violating another country's airspace for nothing. A public disaster could put American personnel in enemy hands and raise hard questions from Islamabad to Washington.
That danger reached all the way to the White House. Decision-makers had to judge whether the intelligence was strong enough to justify a secret operation inside another country, and whether a ground force could reach the compound, survive whatever went wrong, and still bring back proof. The uncertainty could not be briefed away. It had to be accepted.
The trail to the compound began with years of slow intelligence work. Bin Laden had avoided electronic communications that could be easily traced and relied instead on trusted couriers. Intelligence officers matched nicknames, captured documents, fragments of conversation and travel patterns to real people. One courier, believed to be especially close to Bin Laden, kept surfacing until his movements became a priority.
Surveillance eventually led analysts to a distinctive compound. Its walls were high and topped with wire. It had no telephone or internet connection. Residents burned their trash rather than putting it out for collection. Children inside did not attend local schools, and a privacy wall shielded a balcony on the upper floor. No single detail proved the case, but together they looked unlike an ordinary home.
The compound also stood out because of what it did not show. There was no ordinary digital trail, no easy public life, and no routine that matched the value of the property and the care taken to hide the people inside. Analysts compared those absences with the courier's movements until the building became less a suspicious address than the center of a working theory.
Even then, certainty stayed out of reach. Photographs and pattern-of-life reports suggested a high-value figure, but they did not show Bin Laden clearly. A missile strike might destroy the target, but it could also kill civilians, erase proof, and leave no chance to collect intelligence. A ground raid promised identification and materials, but it exposed pilots and operators to mechanical failure, gunfire, and diplomatic crisis. The decision settled on helicopters, a hand-picked assault team, and a narrow window of darkness. Planners turned photos and measurements into a training site, while operators practiced approaches, breaches, room entries, and contingencies until the sequence lived in their bodies. That preparation mattered when the first helicopter crashed, because the mission did not stop. It changed shape. The aviation side of the plan was just as demanding. The aircraft had to cross into Pakistan, fly low enough to reduce detection, arrive together, place teams at exactly the right points, and then carry everyone out again with fuel, weight, and time all working against them. The helicopters were not background transportation. They were part of the operation's central risk.
Inside the compound, the team from the downed aircraft pulled security, checked that no one was trapped, and began opening paths through doors, gates, and walls. The other team pressed in from outside the perimeter, covering sectors and tightening the net. The goal was to keep anyone from escaping while still moving fast enough to reach the most guarded spaces before confusion turned into organized resistance. At the guest house, shots broke out as armed men confronted the intruders. The operators responded with lethal speed, clearing rooms that blended family life with possible fighting positions. Women and children were moved away from the immediate fight and placed under guard as the assault teams kept moving. Every decision happened in close quarters, with limited visibility and little time. Inside the main house, hallways and stairwells narrowed the raid to a few men at a time. Night vision goggles turned darkness into grainy green shapes, but every doorway still hid uncertainty. On the lower floors, the teams encountered residents who were armed, frightened, confused, or trying to understand what had happened. The operators moved quickly but deliberately, balancing speed with the need to avoid terrible mistakes.
That environment forced the raid into human scale.
Large national decisions became a man at a doorway, another man covering a hallway, and a third calling what he saw in a room where children or armed adults might be only steps apart. The whole strategic weight of the mission depended on disciplined judgment in spaces too small for hesitation and too dangerous for carelessness.
Each floor cleared without finding the target increased the pressure. Intelligence had pointed toward the upper levels, where a reclusive figure was believed to live behind more protected spaces. The men climbed toward that area, calling room counts and status updates that reached distant command centers only as fragments. Far away, leaders heard call signs and confirmations, but the decisive moment was still inside the house.
At the top of the stairs, months of rehearsal met seconds of judgment. The operators approached the final rooms with rifles raised, knowing the man beyond the doorway might be the target they had searched for since 2001. The man inside did not come out with his hands raised. The team reacted as trained in close quarters. In a short encounter, bin Laden was killed, and his presence was confirmed first by physical features and later through more formal methods. That moment became the raid's turning point because it resolved the central uncertainty. Until then, the operation had only probabilities, a compound that looked right, a courier who mattered, and a hidden resident who fit the pattern. Once bin Laden was identified and killed, the mission shifted from search and assault to confirmation, exploitation, and escape.
The raid was not over when the primary target was down. The team still had to secure the body, clear remaining rooms, manage civilians, and gather anything that might reveal networks, plans, or contacts. Hard drives, thumb drives, papers, and notebooks were collected quickly. Each item could become a thread leading to other figures or plots, and every minute spent searching had to be weighed against the risk of staying too long.
That collection phase was one reason the ground raid had been chosen, despite the danger. A destroyed compound might have answered whether bin Laden had been there, but it would not have opened desks, computers, storage devices, or handwritten notes. The operators were buying intelligence value with time, and time was the resource they had least.
Outside, the wrecked Black Hawk created another urgent problem. Its modified features could not be left intact for anyone to study. Charges were placed to destroy sensitive components, and the aircraft was reduced to twisted metal inside the compound. A replacement helicopter was called in. Teams redistributed people and equipment, and the entire force prepared to lift out before Pakistani forces could close the distance.
When the helicopters finally rose from Abbottabad and turned toward the border, the tactical result was clear. The man the United States had hunted since September 11 was dead. His body was in American custody, and the house that had hidden him had been stripped of what could be carried. The flight out carried relief, fatigue, and the knowledge that a long pursuit had reached its end.
Within hours, the result became public. Crowds gathered in American cities, while cameras later showed a damaged compound in Abbottabad. Bin Laden was buried at sea from a United States Navy vessel, denying any fixed gravesite that could become a shrine. Inside intelligence circles, attention shifted quickly from the announcement to the materials recovered from the house.
The public reaction showed how deeply the search had entered American memory. For many people, the announcement brought back the morning of September 11th itself, the long wars that followed, and the feeling that one unfinished part of the story had finally reached an answer. For others, especially in Pakistan, the same event raised sharp questions about sovereignty, trust, and what had been known about the compound.
The raid did not end the broader struggle against violent extremist groups, but it removed the figure whose survival had symbolized defiance for nearly a decade. It also highlighted the reach of American Special Operations Forces and the integration of intelligence, aviation, planning, and close-quarters judgment that had developed over years of war. At the same time, it strained relations with Pakistan, whose leaders had not been warned in advance.
In military classrooms, Operation Neptune Spear became a study in risk, secrecy, preparation, and adaptation. Planners examined the helicopter crash, the decision to choose a ground raid over a strike, and the way teams kept momentum after the plan broke. The raid showed that famous moments in modern war often turn on details too small for headlines: a courier's habits, a wall on the balcony, a pilot's split-second correction, and an operator's decision at a doorway in the dark.